Hello, welcome to Naturally par José, a health and well-being podcast. I am your host, José Fortin. Today's episode topic is about a subject that is very important to me. I wanted to start my podcast talking about this topic because I find it's not something we talk about enough, and there's not enough emphasis put on resolving the issue. While a percentage of the population is aware that we have a plastic environmental disaster on our hands, most do not know the severity of the problem and all the impact it has on everybody's health. In the Great Pacific area between Japan and North America, there is a huge vortex that has a circular motion and tends to bring debris toward its center. The vortex is created by the convergence of different currents and winds and push everything towards an area that is about the size of the province of Quebec or about 3 times the size of France. This area is full of plastic that is not biodegradable. While most people imagine a huge plastic island that you can see from outer space, really most of it is composed of microplastic, which are tiny pieces of plastic, the bigger the size of fingernails, while the smallest are not even visible. You need a microscope to be able to see them. This area is called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch and was first described in 1988. So that's 36 years ago, in a paper published by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. But really, it is almost 10 years later, in 1997, that Charles Moore, an oceanographer that did the Trans-Pacific Yacht Race, came upon the enormous stretch of floating debris. And that's when the awareness of the situation really took off, where the scientific community really start looking at the problem in depth and the public in general start being more aware of the issue. But again, we're talking about 27 years ago, and still we don't hear about it that much. So it is something that we should be a lot more aware of. That is one area in the world. There is actually 5 other major vortexes created in the different oceans around the planet where the same situation has been examined. So there are debris in all of those 5 major vortexes. It took until 2009 before more efforts were done at researching the issue and really trying to find solutions. Let's look at some statistics to put the problem in focus. In 2022, a study estimated that 90% of the total debris mass was composed of plastic. While microplastic dominate the area by count, 92% of the mass still consists of large objects that have not yet fragmented in smaller pieces. In there, we can see toothbrushes, little duckies that swim on top of the ocean. There's some Nike shoes that were found. There's a lot of different debris that compose this area, but the common factor is most of it is plastic, because anything else has a tendency to degrade quite rapidly in water and wouldn't last that long. But plastic does not decompose. It will only break down in smaller pieces. We are talking about 8 to 10 million metric tons of plastic floating in the ocean. There's about 80% of that plastic that is supposed to come from land, while 20% comes from boats. If we keep in mind that it is estimated that only 30% of the debris dumped in the ocean will float at the surface, 70% sinks to the bottom, while 8 to 10 million metric tons of plastic represent only 30% of what we actually dumped in the ocean. This is enormous. Since 1945, the accumulation of plastic is estimated to have increased tenfold every decade. This is something we should be concerned about because until this year, the amount of plastic accumulating in the sea has been increasing and not decreasing. The effort for cleaning out the ocean has really started only a few years ago, and it's only this year that they are removing enough detritus to be equal to the amount that will come in the ocean this year. So we're per par at the moment. We're not denting the big accumulation yet. What are the consequences of this? There's several for the marine life. The first one is that a lot of the floating debris at the surface is composed of synthetic fishing nets. The fishes in the ocean get stuck in those and they are not able to get unstuck. They stay there and it is doing what is called ghost fishing. Those nets are actually catching marine life and keep them trapped. Marine life also eat the plastic that is mixed with the plankton because fishes will eat plankton and algae for their nutrition. But right now in those areas, it is estimated that the amount of microparticle of plastic is higher than the plankton. In the most concentrated area, there's about 6 particles of microplastic per 1 particle of plankton. This means that when fishes are eating their usual food, they are only getting a very small amount of nutrition because most of it is plastic and it will have a tendency to accumulate in their digestive tract. It will not be eliminated easily because plastic is not something fishes can digest. It will have a tendency to just sit there for a very long period of time. If they stay in those areas too long, the plastic has a tendency to accumulate and they can even have a rupture of their stomach because it gets overextended. The fish are starving because they don't have enough food, the actual plankton being absorbed. So they're eating, and they just end up dying because their stomach ruptures. If fishes by chance are missing the nets and they are lucky and they ate a very good feast before getting to that area, they don't need to eat that much. They can also die from toxicity because plastic has an oil base, and like in our body, toxins have a tendency to be stored in oils. The oil in the plastic will tend to absorb and bind toxins that floats in the ocean. There's some countries that dump their DDT, BCP, POP, like all kind of chemicals in the ocean to get rid of. The plastic will have a tendency to bind to those chemicals and keep them trapped. If the fishes are eating it, they are developing toxicity. They're getting poisoned. Another issue that we see because of this big plastic mass on top of the ocean, there's less sunshine getting through to lower level of the ocean where the plankton is made. Since there's less sunlight, because it's a photosensitive process, like it needs sunlight to reproduce. Well, because there's less sunlight, the concentration of plankton is naturally declining. Because of that, not only the plastic takes the space of some plankton, but also because of the opacity of the water at the surface, it will have a tendency to not be produced as much. So the concentration of plankton is going down in the ocean. It's produced less and less. This greatly disturbs the marine life because a lot of animals will die. Not only they will die from these conditions, but because there's a lesser population of fishes around, there's some others that will thrive a little bit more, particularly the parasitic type like jellyfish, sponges. They don't seem to be as affected, and they even like to bind to plastic. And this allowed them to go further from the coast because those species usually have a tendency to stay closer, while now they can go a lot further in the ocean and survive. It's creating a big disturbance in the ecosystem. It is estimated that there's 277 species that are affected by this situation. So this is a big segment of animal life. This is the situation we see in the oceans. The same thing applies to lakes and rivers. After seeing this big issue, scientists being aware that microplastics can be a big concern for health, Well, they started looking at what's going on land. Scientists are looking at our rivers and our lakes, and they are finding microplastics everywhere. There are some studies showing that every water course around the world have different concentration of microplastic. If that river or the lake is located close to big population, they have a tendency to have a lot more plastic. While if they're far away, then usually the concentration is lesser. But every river or lake does contain microplastics. This is even a bigger concern because not only it affects all the animals on earth because this is their water source, but it is the main source of drinkable water on earth. This is something that concerns all of us. If we find plastic everywhere, it is in our water we drink at home. There are some particles that are tiny, and you need a microscope to see them. We should be concerned because even if we have a facility that clean up the water and eliminate a lot of stuff, it doesn't eliminate everything. The microscopic plastic are still present in our water. At the moment, they're studying to see how to eliminate as much as possible and what would be an acceptable level of plastic to expect in our water. And the answer should be zero, but let's be realistic. This will not happen, not anytime soon, anyways. They are trying to find ways to eliminate as much as possible. Not only we find plastic in our water, but now they're looking at humans and the possibility of plastic everywhere in our bodies. And they do find plastic in all human soft tissues. Like they find some in our digestive tract, some in our liver or kidneys, the heart, the uterus. They even find plastic in breast milk. When a mother is breastfeeding their children now, they transmit some plastic at the same time. Even more concerning, there's even some in our brain. There's a blood-brain barrier that prevents nasty stuff from getting to our brain. So there's a natural layer of protection in our body that actively prevent a lot of things from harming our brain. And plastic is able to get through that barrier and into our brain. There was some study that even showed that people who are more exposed to microplastic that have a higher concentration are more prone to develop issues like Alzheimer's disease, dementia, learning problem such as attention deficit disorder or hyperactivity, autism. They're looking at a lot of different things right now. It is quite scary because plastic can get all the way to our brain and it's not biodegradable, so our body won't be able to just get rid of it. Well, it's not a good thing. Okay, so plastic is everywhere. There's some in the water we drink. We find some everywhere in our body. It's staying there. It's not going anywhere. It will not degrade. But what is very concerning is that when plastic is exposed to sun rays, it will emit bisphenol A, which we'll call BPA going forward. And this chemical is a xenoestrogen, a man-made environmental estrogen. Those will impact our health in a lot of different ways. Xenoestrogen increase the total concentration of estradiol in free form in the plasma. They tend to elevate those levels higher than they should be. They have a stimulating effect on aromatase. It's an enzyme that transforms male hormones into estrogen. It also will compete with sex hormone binding globulin that controls the amount of male sex hormone in the tissue that can be used. It also have an impact on how the estrogen and androgen receptors behave. It will even impact the gene expression and sexual maturation. The impact of xenoestrogen is very profound on our body, and this will cause what we call estrogen dominance. Your body is washed by an unusually high concentration of estrogen like compounds circulating around there all the time. This is a lot of biochemical information. I'll break it down for you guys so that it is very clear exactly what this is all doing to our body. Well, first of all, we'll look at the impact these xenoestrogens have on the female reproductive system. It will affect sexual maturation. We now see young girls of 8 years old having their menses in the 1980s. Before 12, you were considered to have your menses quite early. But yes, young girls now have their menses around 8 years old. A lot of them do. Like they're still babies. They're still young little children that should be just playing and not thinking of bleeding every month. So this is very, very disturbing. Also, it will have a big impact on our reproductive cycle. Women have a tendency to have a lot heavier menses. It's also worsening PMS symptoms. Women are more prone to having headaches, to having mood swings, to have anxiety, depression. Their menses have a tendency to be a lot closer together. A lot of women, instead of having a cycle of 28 days, can end up having a cycle of 21 days, which is quite short and comes back quite often, so make them more prone to anemia. It will also impact weight gain related to this imbalance of hormones. So it's a weight gain that's a lot harder to get rid of. It's a weight gain that will have a tendency to increase instead of going down. And women that fight this, usually if they don't know why it's doing this, it can be quite frustrating and hard to overcome. It will also cause more fibrocystic lumps in the breast, more risk of having fibroids in the uterus. Polycystic ovaries will increase fatigue. A lot of toxins are circulating around. This can make you be more fatigued. The reduction in sex drive, and not least, a big increase in infertility. This is very sad because when you want children and you're not able to have them, this can have a big impact on our mental health and on our well-being. It does have an impact on our potential survival of the species if we keep affecting it in a negative way like this. If we look at the impact on male reproductive system, well, men have a tendency to feminize. They will develop breasts. I'm not talking about those nice pecs some guys get when they do exercise. No, not those types of breasts. They are soft tissues like women, and they have a look that's pretty close to what women can get. Men have a tendency to develop those a lot more easily. They will have also more abdominal weight gain. They will see an accumulation of fat on their stomach area. There will be a reduction in muscle mass. It is becoming more difficult for men to develop muscles. They have to work at it a lot harder, and the muscle mass will tend to reduce a lot if they don't do exercise on a regular basis. It will have a tendency to do that even more because of all those estrogen floating around. There's an increased risk of erectile dysfunction, and again, an increase in infertility. Survival of the race is getting a lot more questionable if we keep dumping plastic everywhere in our environment. Other impact on our health, it can increase the risk of strokes, of blood clots, of heart disease. If it accumulates in our heart tissue, the heart works really hard. It doesn't need plastic sitting around there to cause issues. It will also have an impact on the incidence of diabetes, asthma, and also all the issues I mentioned earlier, attention deficit disorder, hyperactive disorder, and all those issues that are linked to your brain. The cancer incidence also increase with all this excess estrogen floating around. The risk of breast, ovarian, endometrial and testicular cancers are increasing quite significantly. As I mentioned, they're making a lot of effort to clean it up. A lot of countries do not want to take lone responsibility of this because it's so huge. A lot of private sector companies are trying to find ways to recycle all that plastic and find useful ways to use it. There's even some companies that are trying to find ways to transform plastic into fuel for cars and different things. This is quite interesting. They've tried to find ways that will use the plastic and not create the same situation over and over again. They're working really hard at that to clean up what is already there. But as I mentioned, this year we're pretty much cleaning up the amount of plastic that should be dumped in the ocean during the year. It is a huge undertaking. And if we do not contribute as consumers, we're not helping the situation. Well, this is a problem that will stay with us for a very long time. And all those health issues that were mentioned earlier because of the presence of those xenoestrogen and also just the presence of plastic in our body, well, then we do have a responsibility as human beings to try to reduce all that plastic that's floating around. What we can have the biggest impact on is all that single-use plastics that are used just to wrap up things so that they will stay fresh or protected. We have to find other ways to do those things, and we have to encourage companies that are trying to find other ways. As human beings, we have to reduce our consumption of plastic as much as we can. A very interesting side note, I know there's some low BPA plastic that they have made. Low BPA still mean that there's some BPA that can be emitted by those plastic, just in smaller concentration. But why are they emitting less? Is it because there's more harmful toxins in there or chemicals in there that can create havoc on our health as well? Or is it really safer? These are all questions that need answers, and we don't have any answers yet. Low BPA plastic is not a long-term solution. It is something, yes, that can be considered in some specific situation, but when we can avoid plastic, we should make the effort of avoiding it. We won't be able to eliminate everything because the medical world still need plastic for some of their equipment, and there are some things that cannot be totally avoided, but everything that we can help with, we should make an effort and do our part. Solution to reduce our consumption of unique usage plastic. One of the things they find in very high concentration in that plastic garbage patch is plastic bottles. And if we make the effort of instead of getting those plastic bottles every time we go outside of home, we should avoid buying any water in those bottles. They're full of xenoestrogen because most of those bottles, you often see them sitting right in the sun and accumulate very nice amount of BPA before you drink them up. So just imagine that picture in your head and already they won't feel as refreshing. I would suggest double wall vacuum insulated stainless steel bottle instead. They're very efficient. We use them a lot at home and I find them amazing because they really keep the water at the temperature you want. If you want hot water, your drink stays hot for hours. If you want cold water with ice and you're going out on a picnic and your bottles stay right in the sun, the water inside is still nice and cool, feeling very refreshing. These are amazing and it's not a lot more trouble just to fill up your bottle before you leave home. And there are some that are very practical. They have a handle. They can be carried around very easily. One thing we do at home since they banned the plastic bags in grocery stores, which was great because we were already doing reusable plastic bags at home. But when that happened, we started using compostable plastic bags instead of plastic garbage bags in our garbage to put all our waste. That way, those bags are not lasting for centuries. They have a short lifespan, and we just are more careful of not overfilling them because they're not as durable. So they will have a tendency to tear more easily, but they are a way safer alternative for your environment. We have a smaller garbage, try to waste less. So we do a lot of composting, and we do use compostable bags even for our garbage. Cardboard containers instead of plastic containers for produce in grocery stores. We're seeing companies that are starting to make the effort of giving us those cardboard container instead of plastic containers for strawberries, blueberries, and the same thing about mushrooms. If you have mushrooms, they put them in plastic container, they wrap them with stretch and seal, and it's plastic over plastic. I'm always getting my mushroom in those paper bags instead. They do last as long. Just be careful of the way you store them, and they should be able to last you the full week. It's a better idea to try to go to the grocery more often, smaller amounts, and be less wasteful. And that way we avoid using more plastic to keep everything fresh. Avoid styrofoam in any form. So people who are still using styrofoam cups or styrofoam plates, these should be banned. They should not even sell them in stores anymore because they're a form of plastic as well. These should be completely eliminated. There's always another alternative you can use instead of those. Everything that has to do with food, you should avoid using plastic with, particularly in that instance, because you do not want to eat those xenoestrogens. You do not want them to come in contact with your food. Bringing reusable bags to put your apples in so that you can buy them, bring them home, and then just put them in your fruit compartment, and that's it. You have avoid using a unique usage plastic bag, and that's less pollution for the environment. Your food, try to avoid storing it in plastic containers, especially if they're going to go in the microwave, or anything that has heat or sunlight will produce more BPA. You want to store your leftovers in glass containers, stainless steel containers, and avoid all those plastic containers as much as possible. Use those for other things, like to put screws in your garage, or as containers for other stuff, but do not use them in your kitchen, not with your food. Whenever you have a chance to get something else instead of, buy the alternative. Even if it's a little bit more expensive, it's money well invested. It's for your health and your environment. Replace your plastic cleaning wrap. There's a lot of containers you can get that already come with covers. Even if they are plastic covers, those are reusable covers. It's a good idea to minimize any plastic in relation to food, but at least that is not sitting right next to food in most time, unless you're filling your containers right up to the rim. You should get containers with covers and not have to use the clinging wrap. Something I saw at the grocery store that was amazing, like, when you buy toilet paper and Scott towel, it's usually wrapping a lot of plastic wrapping just so that you can bring it home, and then that is just pollution. But I saw a little company that made the effort of wrapping their sponge towel in a paper wrapping instead of plastic. When you see things like that, please encourage them. Buy their product instead of the other ones that use tons of plastic to wrap everything. Do not forget your baby. Baby's exposure to plastic is enormous. We have a tendency to put their food in plastic plates, give them plastic utensils, because they tend to throw everything on the ground. But that means they have a higher exposure even than us, and they're so tiny. Those chemicals are even more harmful to them because they need a lot less to have a negative impact. So consider everything that has to do with your babies, especially with their food. So no plastic bottles, no plastic cups, plastic dishes, and utensils. Babies put everything in their mouth. So if you can find alternatives to toys made of plastic, that is fantastic. That will help reduce their exposure. For those that are health conscientious and like taking natural supplements, you do know companies that have your health as first priority because those companies have made their research and some of them will not use any plastic to put their supplements in. They are doing everything to keep you healthy. Some companies have policies of using glass bottles instead of plastic bottles to put their supplements in. You'd see those companies that will go a little bit further for you, that will keep your health as priority and not look at their profit margin quite as much. They do stand out quite well. So keep an eye for those supplement companies that store everything in glass bottles. They have higher standards than most. They are trying to avoid BPA. We saw BPA was a really bad xenoestrogen that has a lot of side effects, but it's not the only xenoestrogen. We have to be aware that other chemicals we use here and there can have estrogenic effect in our system. They are xenoestrogens as well. Reducing plastic will reduce exposure to a xenoestrogen, but there's others you can keep an eye on. So here I won't go as much in detail. I'll go really briefly. We'll just look at the big general categories, but eventually I'll do another episode that will go more in depth with those. But just look at herbicide, pesticides. A lot of them do have estrogenic effect. They're xenoestrogen. If you eat organic as much as possible, that does help. It is highly recommended not to use any herbicide, pesticide at home. That can help reduce your exposure level. For golfers, golf course use huge amount of herbicide, pesticide most of the time. There's some courses that are now herbicide, pesticide free. They will use alternatives to the chemical ones. They are a lot safer to go to. Gentlemen, keep an eye for those, particularly if you want to avoid these excess estrogen in your body. Everybody, cosmetics, women, men, children. Now there's some lines of cosmetics that are aiming for young children in general. Just be aware that a lot of personal products use chemicals that do mimic estrogen in our body, parabens, phthalates. There's a lot of different chemicals put in those different products that can have xenoestrogenic effect. If you use products that are more naturally oriented, that use plant-based product instead of chemicals in their cosmetics, that can help reduce your exposure to xenoestrogen. The kids' lines usually are the worst for xenoestrogen concentration. If they're not natural, they have a tendency to have very high concentration of those chemicals. Be aware of those. Synthetic fragrance in perfume, but also in just general household products like your laundry soap, your cleaner for the house, anything that has a synthetic fragrance in it can have a xenoestrogenic effect. Canned foods are also coated with BPA. If you're reducing your exposure to plastic but increase canned food, that can be an issue. There are some natural companies that do avoid BPA, so they're not coating their cans with those chemicals, but it's still a good thing to be aware of. And there are some we cannot avoid because they have been put in our environment a long time ago. And as I say, plastic have a tendency to store them up. There are some chemicals like DDT or BCB endosafrane that have been banned a long time ago here in Canada, but it took a lot longer for other countries to follow suit. There are some countries that might still have some, but most of them should be eliminated because they have been shown to be harmful for humans. But we still find some in our environment. They have been binding to plastic and they have a long lifespan. Because of that, we can still find traces of them here and there. Flame retardants are also something we cannot avoid, and they're definitely xenoestrogen. All our furniture in our house are sprayed with flame retardants in case we have a fire so that it doesn't spread quickly to save life. But on the other hand, you're exposed to their chemicals all the time. That means you always have chemical compounds that mimic estrogen surrounding you. What can you do? Yes, you can eat organic. You can choose the type of cosmetics, the canned food you're eating, etc. But some very easy things to do would be first drink filtered water. Get an NSF certified filter. That's the minimum to help eliminate some of the things in water, especially carbon filters. They do tend to capture very small particles, so that can help reduce your exposure. We'll talk about filtered water later on in one of my episodes, but for now, at least do those steps. That should already help. Dust and vacuum often, because all those components floating around in your house, if you keep it clean, the concentration goes down. You're going to reduce your exposure unless you're using something that has a synthetic fragrance, then maybe not. But if you do vacuum regularly and you use a EPA filter vacuum, that will usually capture all those little particles that can be harmful if they stay in your environment. Wash your hands regularly, particularly before meals, because you do not want to manipulate food and you don't want to put those chemicals you touch around your house in your mouth. You don't want to ingest them directly. That is a very good habit to have. Foods that can help detox xenoestrogen. That's very interesting. There are some food that can actually help your aromatase not overreact as much, and they can also help neutralize and flush them more easily. They can help deal with the xenoestrogen. They won't clean up the plastic particles, but they can help take care of the estrogen mimicking chemical compounds that are floating in your body. So those foods are kale, collard greens, broccoli, cauliflower, arugula, and broccoli sprouts. Those are very interesting to add regularly in your diet. Food to avoid that can be detrimental when you have a xenoestrogen overload are red meats and dairies in particular. They are at the top of the food chain. Those chemicals have a tendency to concentrate the higher you go into the food chain, because the one on top eat the one at the bottom. So if there's a little bit at the bottom and they eat a lot of them, well, they end up having a high concentration of xenoestrogen. The higher in the food chain, the more concentrated those tend to be. So red meats and dairy are at the top. And then as you go down to vegetal, those have a tendency to be a little bit less concentrated. There will be a lot less of xenoestrogen in vegetal food product than there is in animal food product. Processed food should be avoided as well, because you need fiber to clean those toxins out. You need fiber to flush out all the particles that can come into your system. You don't want to have your body a chance to absorb them. You want them to be attached to those fiber and be flushed out. The healthier diet you have, the more fiber you have, the lesser the concentration in microparticles of plastic should be in your body. Avoid processed foods, avoid refined grains, eat lots of fruit, lots of vegetables. Those will tend to help get rid of those toxins and will help you be healthier in general. Finally, my last advice, but not the least, speak out. Talk about it. Let people know. Discuss this. It's not something that should go untold. We need to make a concerted effort. I'm giving you all a challenge, and I hope you will give that same challenge to everybody around you. So please take this seriously. I want you to try to reduce your use of plastic by half. You know those recycling bins you have, or you should have? Look at the amount of plastic in them. you should be able to reduce that amount by half. Give that challenge to everybody around you. And if you can even reduce it more, good job. Thank you for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed, please follow or subscribe on the platform you are using. You can also press the notification bell to be aware of when a new episode is posted. You can also press the notification bell to be aware when I post a new episode, which will be Tuesday morning. And I hope I will see you with our next episode. Have a nice day.